Hello everyone. Financial management in nonprofit organizations is one of the more commonly associated functions of a board. And depending on the board structure, it can either be very hands-on, where board directors manage the banking, the accounting, and other functions, or it can be hands-off, where dedicated staff handle such transactions. Regardless, in any nonprofit, it is the board or governing body that has some final say regarding these financial aspects. Take a look at any organizing documents, such as the Articles of Incorporation or even the bylaws, and some mention of financial oversight is included. One thing I must mention is that it is important to know the specific financial and governance laws and policies that apply to each particular state, as some states have requirements for things like minimum number of board members, or if the organization needs to have some sort of membership. Whatever the case is, a nonprofit organization should always consult with a professional on these matters. Now, in this module, our key question has been, how can a nonprofit board effectively manage the nonprofit's financial affairs? The answer to this question is, in my view, comes from focusing in on two specific words: effectively manage. Effectively manage. What specifically does being effective in an organization's finances mean? And what is the role of the board to ensure that it happens? For one thing, a board must keep the overall mission of the organization in mind. Financial decisions should align with the mission, and if they don't, then a board must ask why. Along with being strategic is overseeing how the day-to-day affairs and operations are conducted. Banking and accounting functions need to be clear, so a nonprofit should have clear policies and procedures with things like who gets to receive the monies, who signs checks, who writes thank you letters to donors, all very important functions. Not only should the board know, or at least be aware of, the day-to-day, but a board should also have a general sense for the bigger. That is, the macro level, being informed through financial reporting. Things like what is being spent and where they draw the revenues from, how much, if any, is in investments or endowments, how do they plan to fundraise. While we didn't cover in detail the specific financial reports such as a balance sheet or the statement of financial position, sometimes called a profit and loss in for-profit corporations, an effective board will, at least on a regular basis, be informed and, if possible, even make it a point of discussion at board meetings. While there are some ways to manage effectively, while there are some ways to measure this, such as solvency, the size of endowments, and other financial metrics, it's also defined by how the board makes and executes their financial decisions, especially if they have staff. If a nonprofit does, in fact, have staff, such as a CEO, executive director, all these issues from day-to-day to the long-term strategic now have another layer of responsibility that the board has to consider. Again, while it is the nonprofit corporation that legally is bound, and hence the board who leads the corporation, the CEO, ED, as the staff member, and possibly other members like the CFO of the nonprofit, have a big influence on decisions. It's because of this, it's imperative that the board and the CEO work hand in hand. Their relationship must be strong if the nonprofit is to be effective, especially with respect to finances. I cannot underscore how important the board-CEO relationship is. And next week, we'll get into more detail on that. So let me take a brief moment to talk to you about our upcoming paper that's due at the end of this week, the legal and managerial aspects of nonprofit boards. The key to this assignment is thinking about the functions of a nonprofit board. Legally, it's pretty easy to define, as that is essentially structural. I suggest you refer to some of the earlier readings on how a nonprofit is structured, what makes it distinct from a for-profit corporation, what legal responsibilities does the board need to consider, and so on. What will be interesting, and the point of this assignment, is to think through the type of board governance that is used and what makes that effective for the particular organization that you choose. I know that in the last announcement I gave you some ideas on the types of nonprofit boards. Again, by types I don't mean legally, but rather how they lead, whether in an advisory capacity, a political capacity, a working board, or a representative type board. Let me give you a simple example. In most public school districts in the United States, there is an elected school board comprised of citizens who represent a geographic area. The governing board, the school board, sets policies, the budget, the strategic direction, and hires staff, the superintendent. The superintendent is, of course, responsible for all that happens educationally, but in the end, legally reports to the board. What would happen if the board, instead of being a governing elected board, becomes advisory in nature? And that if a vacancy on the board occurs, a board member could just appoint another person to sit on the board. What are the implications for an advisory type board for the operations of the organization? How would it change things, and in what specific way? Would it actually be better for the ultimate mission of the organization? Remember to compare. So doing a what if in your paper would be helpful, and a compare and contrast discussion would be interesting. In the end, I hope that this assignment will give you a feel for how board structure can differ based on the goal and mission of the organization, and that no one board structure is better than the other. There are just different things to think about depending on what that structure is. I hope this has helped, and I look forward to reading your papers. As usual, if you have any questions on this or on any part of the class, please don't hesitate to ask. Continue whatever discussions we are having through our current module, and I will see you all online.